All right, you guys, I'm going to read chapters 5, 6, and 7, and we're getting closer to the end. This is where all the action begins. Okay. Chapter 5, Signs from the Gods. Odysseus awoke with the first light of day. When he heard the sounds of weeping coming from Penelope's chamber, a fresh wave of worry washed over him. He lifted his hands and prayed to the most powerful of the gods. "Oh, Father Zeus," he whispered, "if it is your will that I win this battle today, please send me a sign." A moment later, thunder rumbled in the clear blue heavens overhead. A servant was grinding corn nearby. "Thunder," she exclaimed, "and not a cloud in sight. Lord Zeus must be sending us a sign. May this be the last day that I slave for these terrible men." Odysseus was glad to hear her words and glad to hear the omen from the mighty god of the skies. As dawn spread her rosy-fingered light throughout the rest of the palace, Telemachus rose from his bed and dressed for the coming battle. He slung his sword over his shoulder and tied on his sandals. He picked up his bronze-pointed spear and left his room. In the courtyard outside, the suitors had gathered again to discuss how they might slay the young prince. But as they plotted against the son of Odysseus, a strange sight appeared in the sky. An eagle soared overhead, gripping a dove in its talons. "Lord," said one of the suitors, "that is surely a bad omen for us. I fear it means our plot will fail." The other suitors shrugged off the sign and streamed into the great hall for their morning feast. As they passed around bowls of wine, Telemachus entered the hall with Odysseus. Still disguised as a beggar, Odysseus sat on a stool near the table. Telemachus poured wine into a bowl and offered it to the ragged man. One of the suitors laughed and stood up. "Let me make a contribution to the beggar's bowl," he said, and then he hurled a cow's foot through the air at Odysseus. Odysseus ducked, then smiled through clenched teeth at his attacker. But Telemachus whirled on the rude suitor in the fury. "You may eat from our table and drink from our wine barrels," he shouted, "but you may not abuse a stranger in this noble house." All the suitors burst into laughter. But then the strange wind swept through the hall, carrying a spell from the goddess Athena. The suitors could not stop their laughter. As they howled uncontrollably, their blood seemed to spatter their food. When they were finally able to regain control of themselves, one of the men leaped to his feet. "Oh, lost men! I have just had a terrible vision sent by the gods. I have seen what is to happen here today. I saw the walls of this room covered with blood, and I saw the table and halls filled with ghosts hurrying to the darkness of the land of the dead." Chapter 6, Stringing the Bow. After breakfast, Penelope went to the storeroom of the palace and picked up the huge bow that had once belonged to Odysseus. She carried it out to the hall and set it down before all the suitors. "Listen to me," she said to them. "For a long time you have overrun this house. You have drunk my husband's wine and slaughtered his livestock. You say you are only waiting for me to choose one of you to marry. Well, here is your challenge. If one of you can string the bow of Odysseus and shoot an arrow through the rings of the 12 axe handles in a row, that is the man I will marry." The suitors eagerly took up the challenge. One by one, they tried to string Odysseus' mighty bow. But even though they greased it with hot tallow and warmed it near the fire, that strong bow would not bend. While each suitor took his turn with the bow, the old swineherd and the cowherd, who had long tended Odysseus' cattle, slipped out of the hall. They were sickened by the sight of their enemies handling their master's bow. Odysseus saw the two men go and hurried after them. "Wait," he called, "I have a question for you both. If Odysseus were to drop from the sky and appear before you today, would you fight for him, or would you fight on the side of the suitors?" "Oh, if only Lord Zeus would hear my prayer and lead our master home," said the cowherd. "You would quickly see my strength in fighting for him." The swineherd nodded and uttered his own desperate prayer for Odysseus' return. Odysseus was certain he could trust his two old servants. "You must know then that your prayers have been answered," he said. "I am Odysseus, and if we defeat these suitors, I will honor you both." The two men were speechless. They could not believe that the wretched beggar standing before them was truly their master Odysseus. Odysseus lifted his ragged cloak and revealed the long white scar above his knee. "Remember the wound inflicted by the tusk of the boar when I was young?" he asked. The swineherd and cowherd fell upon their long-lost master and wept. Odysseus embraced them. "Cease your tears now, or someone will see us and tell the others," he said. "Listen carefully to my orders. When we go back inside, give me the bow, that I may have a turn in the contest. After I have it in my hands, make certain that all the women are locked in their rooms, and throw the bar again across the courtyard gate." When Odysseus and his two loyal servants returned to the great hall, they found that none of the suitors had been able to string the bow. "Why do you not resume your contest tomorrow?" Odysseus said. "Perhaps the archer god will help one of you then. But for now, let me hold that smooth bow. I should like to see if there is any force left in my hands, or if my hard travels had taken away all my strength." The men reacted angrily. "You fool, do not dare touch that bow," said Antinous. "Hold your tongue, or we will throw you out to sea." Penelope stood up. "Our guest said he comes from a noble family," she said. "Give him the bow and let him try to string it." "Mother, return to your chamber and your weaving," said Telemachus, for he knew that a bloody battle was about to begin. "I am the master of this house. I will be the one to invite our guest to string the bow." Penelope was surprised by the sharp words of her son, but she lowered her head and returned to her chamber. As she lay on her bed and wept for Odysseus, the goddess Athena closed Penelope's eyelids and sent her into a deep slumber, sparing her from the horror of what was about to happen. In the great hall below, the swineherd and cowherd took the mighty bow and the quiver of arrows and handed them to Odysseus. Then they hurried from the room to give orders to the maids and lock the outside gate. Odysseus slowly examined the bow. Then he bent it and strung it effortlessly, as if he were a musician stringing a harp. When he finished, he plucked the taut cord. It sang like a swallow's note. Thunder rumbled in the sky. Odysseus smiled, for he knew the thunder was another sign from the god Zeus. As the suitors waited in stunned silence, he picked up an arrow and set it against the bow. He aimed at the row of axes. He drew the arrow back and let it fly. The arrow sailed perfectly through each of the 12 axe rings. Odysseus put down his bow and looked at Telemachus. "The stranger you welcomed into your house has not disgraced you," he said. Telemachus nodded. The battle was about to begin. Chapter 7. Death to the suitors. Odysseus threw off his rags and leaped onto the stone threshold of the hall. He glared down at the suitors. That contest is over, he said. But now there is another target for my bow. Help me, Apollo, god of archers. And with those words, Odysseus took aim at Antinous, the leader of the suitors, and sent an arrow straight into the villain's throat. As Antinous fell to the floor, the other suitors sprang from their seats. You will pay for this, one shouted at Odysseus. The vultures will soon eat you. And they all then rushed about in great confusion, searching for their weapons. But no spears or shields could be found. Dogs, Odysseus shouted at them. I, Odysseus, have returned. You never thought you would see me again, did you? But now your final hour has come. Use the tables for shields to block his arrows, one of the suitors shouted. Attack him with your swords. The man rushed at Odysseus with his sword, but Odysseus swiftly slew him with another arrow from his bow. Another suitor ran towards Odysseus, but Telemachus hurled his spear and killed him too. Then Telemachus hurried from the room to get arms for the swineherd and cowherd. Odysseus held off the suitors with his arrows until Telemachus returned with shields and spears and gave the weapons to their two allies. Then the four men stood together against the crowd. One of Odysseus' enemies ran upstairs to the storeroom and found the door unlocked. He grabbed 12 spears and brought them to the others. With the enemy now armed, it seemed impossible to Odysseus that he and his 3 comrades could defend the scores of men. But suddenly the goddess Athena appeared in the hall. Join us in our fight, Odysseus shouted at her. Athena's eyes flashed. You must prove yourself first, she said. Then she turned into a swallow and flew up to the roof beam to watch. One after another, Odysseus sent his arrows streaking through the air, killing many of the suitors. Then he and his 3 comrades hurled their 4 spears at the enemy. When 4 of the suitors went down, Odysseus and his men pulled the spears from their body and hurled them again. The suitors hurled spears too, but Athena sent them astray. Finally, the goddess sent a vision that struck terror into the suitors' hearts. A dark cloud appeared over the great hall. The cloud took the shape of Athena's mighty shield. The suitors knew that a vision of Athena's shield meant certain death. Ruthlessly, Odysseus, Telemachus, and their 2 companions slew man after man. Odysseus spared the life of the minstrel, for the singer sang songs sent from the gods. And he spared the herald, for he wanted him to spread the news that the men of this earth should do good and no evil. But to all the others, Odysseus showed no mercy. By the end of the battle, every suitor had been slain. Their bodies were heaped on the floor like dead fish thrown from a net onto the sand. The god Hermes appeared in the great hall. Holding his golden wand, he led the suitors' ghosts from the palace. Squeaking like bats, the ghosts followed Hermes over the ocean waves. They followed him past snowy rocks. They followed him beyond the sun's gate and beyond the palace of dreams until they arrived at last in the mist-shrouded land of the dead.